our attention in this session to the person of the Apostle Paul. And we don't know everything about Paul, but he does tell us some things about himself as he goes through his different letters. So we know, for example, that he refers to himself as a Jew from Tarsus. What that means is he was born as a citizen of the Roman city called Tarsus. Tarsus was a city of about 500,000 people. It was one of the Roman centers of education. There was a big highway that ran through the town, and so Paul really grew up as something of a city boy in one of the major Roman cities. That also most likely meant that he was from a family that had money. He was not a poor child. He would have grown up as a citizen of Tarsus with some kind of wealth behind his family. Well, in the book of Philippians, chapter 3, he calls himself a Hebrew of Hebrews. It helps to understand that in the first century, there were really two major categories of Jews. There was one group called the Hebrews of Hebrews. They were the Jews that retained all of the Hebrew culture and tradition. They dressed like the Jews were supposed to dress. They talked like the Jews were supposed to talk. There was another group called the Hellenists. These were the Jews who were still Jews, and they still worshiped the Jewish God. But on a day-to-day basis, they adopted many of the cultural practices of the Roman Empire around them. And so when Paul in Philippians chapter 3 talks about himself as a Hebrew of Hebrews, what he's saying is that he has retained the Jewish culture and the Jewish tradition, and he is careful to observe those things. In fact, we learn Paul was actually a Jewish leader. He was a Pharisee, and he kept his position as a Pharisee right all the way through his ministry career. He always referred to himself as a Pharisee, and he used that when he went to teach in synagogues. So we know that he was a Jew from Tarsus. We know that as a Hebrew of Hebrews, he was careful to maintain Jewish culture and tradition in his life. And then we learned that he was a Roman citizen. He talks about that in Acts chapter 22. That's important because Roman citizens had specific rights and privileges that were not always available to everyone who lived in the Roman Empire. For example, as a Roman citizen, Paul was guaranteed a fair trial. He was also guaranteed the opportunity to appeal. If he felt that he did not receive a fair trial, he could appeal to a higher court all the way to the Roman Supreme Court, much like many of our nations have now. And then as a Roman citizen, Paul was exempt from certain forms of punishment. Paul, for example, as a Roman citizen, could not be crucified. Crucifixion was considered a death that was unappropriate for a Roman citizen. Other things like that become important as we watch Paul's ministry unfold. We know, too, that at least at the beginning of his ministry, Paul was referred to as Saul. Now, it may simply be that at some point in ministry, Saul changed his name to Paul. But remember, we know he's a Roman citizen. Roman citizens usually had three names. They had a first name, a middle name, and a last name. And it's very likely that Saul was his first name, Paul was his second name, and of course we don't know what his third name was. It appears that early in his ministry, Saul preferred to be known by his other name, Paul, whether he felt that that was more fitting to his ministry audience or there was some other reason, we're not told. But we know that at one point in his ministry, the Bible tells us that Saul is also called Paul. And after that part of his ministry, He's always referred to as Paul. As we continue with our study, we'll find that some of these kinds of things become increasingly important. The fact that he's a Roman citizen will shed light on how he does ministry and how he faces trial when he's forced into trials, either in synagogues or before Roman governors. His Roman citizenship plays a role in these things. His Jewish culture is important to him. All of these things are helpful to know as in future sessions we begin to study more of Paul's ministry.